I'm going to start recording. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's event, Perfect Publishing Partners. Is there such a thing as a perfect publishing partner? How to brief suppliers to achieve your goals. And what we're implying, I suppose, in that is that not only do you have to find a good supplier, but perhaps maybe as as someone who gets other people to help them, that that would be a good idea to think how you can do that as well as possible. I'd like to hear a little bit about people as well. Hopefully we'll get a bit of time to do that. But I want to just say that last night we had our Bite Shorts event, which was just so lovely. We had 5 readings. Sounds like everyone was in shorts. It wasn't everyone in shorts. It was we had 5 shortlisted writers doing flash fiction, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And we've got a recording of it. Perhaps Monica can put it into the chat onto YouTube. There we go. It was just quite moving. So please do, if you fancy listening to some lovely short stories on World Book Day, then I'd recommend it. We're going to be talking today about how best to engage with your suppliers. We're going to be covering such topics as publicity and marketing. We've got Ben Cameron here from Cameron PR, and then data and how to fifth colour publishing. I've just been hearing about from Bill Hemsley. Simon described him as a whiz, a computer whiz, and that's quite something coming from Simon, who builds beautiful websites. But Bill was also telling us about how he does fixed layout books for very highly illustrated books, which I think could be very interesting to some of our authors and publisher members. And then we also have Andrew, who hasn't put his camera on, unfortunately, but so Simon and Ben have got handouts that we're going to send out afterwards. And Andrew has a handout on how to do, and oh, there we go, he has got his camera on now. Just give us a little wave, Andrew. So his company is called Prepare to Publish. And they do typesetting and editing, and he's just produced this beautiful document as well. I mean, your documents were lovely as well, Ben and Simon, but you know, characteristically, I suppose Andrew's was going to look lovely. So all of those will come as part of the recording. Before we get into the crux of this, and I introduce Simon, who's going to be giving you his thoughts on this topic. It was his clever idea to come up with this topic today. I just want to remind you that our members can get in free to London Book Fair. We've got some tickets, and also Bologna Book Fair. Just if you are coming to London, then do sign up for our networking event. Even if you don't want a ticket, can't sign up for our networking event. We'll be running Reciprocity Circle there for people to try and help each other. And then we also have tickets for Bologna Book Fair. Just drop us a line. Next week, we're doing an event on how to get as a guest onto podcasts. So Andrew's saying he's going to have to turn his video off occasionally, and that's fine. Which I think is really good. She's really interesting, Victoria. And then we're doing the Great Re-Tech after that, how to build things people want. We've got media industry people from AMC and Channel 5 speaking at that. So that's going to be really cool. So I'd like to thank our sponsors officially for today. So firstly, Simon Appleby, who has his blurry background at the top up there, runs Bookswarm. And then we have next to him Bill Hemsley, who, as I said, he's an archivist, so the great data man, but also very good with these illustrated. He was telling me he's done the databases on wine, Hugh Johnson's wine, and recipe books for publishers and how to serve those up, which I think is really interesting for the industry. And then we have Ben Cameron, who's at Cameron PR, waving there. Lots of people need help with their PR, even if they have a publishing contract with someone. And then Andrew, I've just mentioned, who is at Prepare to Publish. Unfortunately, Anthony can't make it today. but he runs Think Big Books Marketing, so also it's like marketing there. I think it might be enough from me now. If you have got any questions, please do put them into the chat. If you've got any comments, put them into the chat. Any websites, anything like that, it all get recorded and we'll send it over to you. But we've allowed for time for questions at the end. So I'm going to pass over to Simon now, and I'm going to be quiet. So here we go. There we go.
Right, thank you very much. It occurred to me, thank you for the introduction. It occurred to me while you were doing the introduction that by calling it Perfect Publishing Partners, I might have implied that we're all the perfect partners and that we're all perfect. And maybe we're, you know, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm perfect, but anyway, you know what I mean. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I've got just a few slides to talk through with some general. Basically, this came about because Justine and I were talking about ideas for events that made sense for suppliers like me to talk to Bite the Book members about. And, you know, I said, well, it would be quite cool to talk about the ways that authors and independent publishers and agencies and basically anyone in the world of books could be a better client. So that's the sort of alternative. That's the sort of alternative subtext of this is how to be a better client. But I wouldn't dare put that on the slide. So anyway, so I'm going to I'm going to read my script and try and stick to it, and then we can answer questions at the end. And depending on, you know, what the question's about, we've got people, you know, who cover various different disciplines, so hopefully we'll be able to answer. So any self-publishing author, any small publisher is going to have to brief external suppliers at some point during their publishing journey, and that can be anything from editorial, cover design, typesetting, publicity, marketing, digital campaigns, databases, other techie stuff, email marketing, all sorts of things. And we think that, I hope that by following some of the tips that I'm about to talk about, that people can get the best results from their chosen suppliers, and hopefully ensure they'll be welcomed back as clients for a long time to come. Now, obviously, there's a strong element of self-interest for me in talking about all this, because if we get nice, clear briefs and nice clients who give us what we want when we want it, it makes us happy. And it hopefully allows us to make more money from the jobs that we do. And that means we'll still be around, and hopefully I'll still have my hair in a few years. Obviously, you know, in the same way that a bunch of authors in a room are inevitably going to be comparing notes about either agents or publishers or self-publishing platforms or whatever, those of us who are on the supply side of publishing do tend to compare notes as well, which is certainly one of the reasons I'm looking forward to getting back to London Book Fair this year, is having a bit of a gossip. And following, you know, the kind of stuff I'm going to talk about means that, you know, you'll definitely be a gold star client, rather than one of the ones that we tell people to avoid at all costs. So the things I'm going to talk about today really do apply whether you're putting together a detailed brief that you want to send out to multiple suppliers, some new project, some new undertaking, or they're really just as applicable if you're sending an email to your existing web agency or your existing cover designer or your existing typesetter or what have you, to say, right, we've got a new brief and this is what we need from you. So it might seem an obvious starting point, but it still needs saying that the best place to start is by working out what you actually want to achieve. Sometimes that is obviously very straightforward and doesn't need a great deal of thought. You know, there are sort of fairly discrete, obvious things like proofreading services or cover designs that don't really need, you know, a rationale beyond their own existence. But other projects do require more clarity of thought, and it's genuinely not uncommon for me to discover that clients are asking for things without knowing why they're asking for them. We've had people ask for things because bear in mind what I do is design websites. We've had people coming to me saying they want a website just because their publisher has told them that's what they should do. They might be asking for it because it's what other people do. And that's not really the best place to be in terms of starting a project. You should know why you're doing it, not why someone else is doing it. So the objective could be as simple as receiving a deliverable at the end of a project. I need a cover for this book. Or they could be, and hopefully for the more interesting sort of complicated projects, they will be more intangible. So they'll be about increasing sales, boosting social media profile, assembling the assets that you need to start another project. For example, in order to sort of set up a bunch of social media profiles, you might need to get all of the design assets and author photos and visual assets that you need first. Whatever they are, project objectives, and this is true whether you're building the Channel Tunnel or commissioning a book cover, a project objective should be attainable, time-bound, and specific. So make sure that once you know what those are, you're clear about them, because a good supplier is going to look at what you want to achieve and not just they'll read between the lines of what you're asking for and will want to understand what you actually want to achieve. So researching the competition is a really good way to kind of shape the brief. In other words, looking at what other people are doing and using that to guide your thinking about what you do and don't like, or do and don't want. So for lots of things, you can see what the end deliverable achieved by someone else was. So if a competitor commissioned graphic design or email marketing campaigns or social media campaigns or editorial or websites, or you can see what they did, because that is out there in the world. You can view it, you can download it, you can buy it. But it's worth bearing in mind that that shows you what was delivered, but it doesn't necessarily tell you if they achieved their objective. It doesn't tell you about the return on the investment they may or may not have achieved. A project can quite easily have good-looking deliverables but not achieve its objectives if the conception was flawed. For things like publicity, marketing, social media marketing, you can see some of the end results. You can see press coverage, you can see activity on the socials, you can see if something goes viral, but you don't necessarily get to see the deliverables that achieved it. So you can see press releases, you can see press coverage, but you can't see what press releases were written, what calls were made, what emails were sent, how much hard work went into those. And of course, this doesn't work for everything. If you're commissioning anything sort of behind the scenes, whether it's business strategy or databases, the reality is you can't really look at what's sort of going on, what other people have got, because it's all behind closed doors. One thing that I do when I'm writing creative briefs for authors, often authors don't know who their own competitors are. So one of the things that I do is just put their name into Amazon and then start looking at the authors that the Amazon algorithm chucks up, and looking at their websites and looking at their social media, and just understanding who Amazon thinks are their competitors, because if nothing else, that usually gives me a reasonable sense of where they sit in the market. So authors can quite easily do that for themselves. Once you know what your objectives are and you've sort of canvassed what other people are doing, then obviously you've got to identify potential suppliers. You've got to find people to talk to about your brief. And there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, there's good old-fashioned, just Google it. There are obviously lots of good online communities and membership organisations for authors and publishers, like the Book of Course, the Society of Authors, the Alliance of Independent Authors, and lots of others, depending on the genre. There are online marketplaces. Reedsy is one which covers editorial services, cover design, web design. I'm on Reedsy. I frequently wish I wasn't, but I am. But you know, they're there. They do tend to add a fairly decent slice to the cost of a project, which is part of my issue with it, but I digress. And then obviously you can look at news channels. You can keep an eye on things like the Bookseller and Book Brunch and the Bite the Book newsletter and all the different media around the industry to try and spot people who are doing things that may be interesting or relevant. Of course, you've got word of mouth as well. You can look at people who have done work for other people that you know. People, you can ask for recommendations. If you see something that you like and you're not clear who's done it, you can always approach the person who commissioned that work and ask them to whether they would recommend that agency, because the worst they can say is no in that situation. I would say this, wouldn't I, but it's definitely worth trying to identify suppliers with relevant experience and specialisms rather than generalists who may not have any industry related know-how. And I think that sort of operates on several levels. I think suppliers who specialise in working with the publishing sector in general will have, I would hope, a lot to offer over a general supplier, whether that's a web designer or a publicity company, or you know, a typesetter who also does power company manuals, or a whatever it is. There is also then a sort of, within the publishing industry, there are obviously subspecialisms. So someone who mostly does travel, an editor who mostly does travel books is not necessarily going to have a great deal to offer an author of children's picture books, for example. So there are circles within circles, and I think the more you can find someone who is a specialist, the more likely they are to ask you about things that you hadn't even thought of. And I think that's, you know, a really important thing about this. And it's perfectly valid to want to talk to multiple people about your requirements, to, you know, to approach different people and shortlist suppliers and talk to a few different ones, because, you know, no one expects you to find the right match the first time and only talk to one person. But by the same token, try not to talk to too many at once, because it becomes hard to manage potentially for you. And you know, if you're sort of casting your net too wide, I think arguably it becomes a bit unfair on the suppliers as well, if you're using their time. The next stage is to gather assets and understand inputs. And by understand inputs, I mean the things you're going to be asked to provide. So obviously at the start of a project, depending on what it is, the start of a briefing process, you may not know all of the things you're going to need, and that's absolutely fine, because the whole point of this is to find someone who's going to work on this project for you, and they will know all the things that you need. But I don't think it's too difficult to think about, to sort of imagine the things you're likely to be expected to provide, and to get at least some of that organised before talking to suppliers, because some of that is good common sense. So using my own field as an example, you know, we would normally expect an author client whose website we are creating to provide photos that they're not ashamed of or appalled by, although not everyone manages to do that, to have covers for books that are published or soon to be published, and to have the actual content, or at least the beginnings of content, for their website. You know, a lot of those same touch points will be true of a publicity campaign. Obviously, in terms of things like typesetting or editorial, there's no point in commissioning those services until a manuscript is at the right stage. So I think the more you can include information about what is already in existence in the brief, and you know, potentially include it in the brief, I think the more likely you are to get a good project outcome. You'll certainly get a quicker project turnaround if your supplier isn't then waiting for those things to appear further on down the line. So at some point, all of this has got to be sort of brought together into a brief. A good brief does not need to be a massive document. We're not talking about a 60-page request for proposal, although those things do exist usually when you're talking about larger projects with larger budgets. And it doesn't need to go into minute detail, but what it does need to say is who this is for, i.e. talk about yourself as a client, talk about what you're trying to achieve, talk about what you want, talk about what assets, what material you will be able to provide, and what input you'll be able to provide, and be very clear about your time, your deadlines, your timing requirements. On the question of money, which is a vexed question sometimes, it's up to you if you want to tell people how much budget you've got to spend. It can save a lot of wasted time, because if you go to a supplier and say, I've got X, and they think that's not sufficient for what you're trying to achieve, then that may just short circuit the process of them recognizing, you collectively, everyone recognizing that it's not a good fit. However, you may be going into this with no particular understanding or appreciation of what you can expect to pay for particular services, and some people are worried about being taken advantage of and saying, I've got 10 grand, and someone's saying, oh, funnily enough, this will cost £9,995. So I personally will ask clients the question, but if they don't want to answer it or can't answer it, it wouldn't be an issue or a red flag for me to continue a conversation. And some suppliers, and this is something we do with author websites, will have sort of preset price points for certain things. So when you say how much for so-and-so, they, instead of asking you a lot of questions, they just say, this is the scope, this is the cost, if that's of interest. This is a sort of package deal. And that may well save a lot of time for everyone. Not all services are sort of suitable for that kind of commoditization or custom things. That just won't exist. Now, this is, in many ways, this diagram is one that I should probably have had tattooed on my forehead when I started working in this industry 20 years ago. You may have come across this before, but what it essentially, and it's certainly not unique to our industry or what I do or what anyone does really, but if you've never come across it before, it illustrates the idea that a project has three key variables: time, cost, and scope. So by time, how long it's going to take; by cost, not just how much money is involved, but how much resource, because people's time also costs money; and scope, i.e. what it includes. And the idea is that your project, any project, exists as a point within this triangle, and by moving it towards either one side or one point, depending on the nature of the request, you are moving it away from the others. So if you move it towards one side, you're moving it away from the opposite point. So if you ask for more features, i.e. if you extend the scope, you're moving the point further to the top. Looks at diagram and waves hand in the right direction. You're moving it to the top. You're moving further away from cost, i.e. you're having less control of cost, and you're moving it further away from time, i.e. it'll probably take longer. If your key issue is, we have got a month to get this done, we have got 4 weeks, that is non-negotiable, then that's fine. You're moving into the bottom right corner, but you are moving away from being able to have full control of how much it costs, and you're moving away from having control of exactly what scope may be included. And this really underpins, almost any bespoke project you can imagine commissioning. So it really does pay to understand it. And it governs the reality of creating books for a publisher as well. You can't simultaneously increase your control over scope, cost, and time. It's almost a law of the universe. So, essentially my entreaty is, don't be the client who wants more features for the same money, or to fit a 10-week project into 2 weeks, because that just, that will result in a lot of eye rolling and probably not a very good outcome. Sometimes if you can't reconcile your ambitions with the realities of time, budget, and scope, you can look at phasing a project. You can look at the idea of minimum viable product, which is, what are the things that this absolutely must have? We'll include those. We'll see how long that takes us and how much that's going to cost us. We'll leave all the rest out, and we'll come back to it if it actually looks like people want this thing. There is, I should add, if you go into Google image search, there's a version of this diagram where quality is one of the 3 corners. But quality absolutely should be non-negotiable. You should be doing the best quality work within the budget, scope, and time that you've got. So this is the triangle of universal reality as far as projects go. Once you've got a brief, obviously you're going to be sharing that with potential suppliers. They are almost certainly going to have questions. On a practical level, try and send out a brief when you actually know you'll be in a position to deal with suppliers' questions. Don't send it out before you disappear on holiday for a fortnight. Don't send it out 3 days before Christmas. These things do happen. Try and sort of carve out the time for actually that process of engagement. If a supplier comes back with questions, it can be a good thing to share their question and your answer with everyone else. Keep everyone on a level playing field. It might speed things up as well. And of course, some suppliers may not get back to you, or may get back to you and say, thanks, but no thanks, this isn't for us. Not everyone is a good fit for everything, and that's fine. Once you receive quotes and proposals from suppliers, the onus is on you as the client to interrogate the replies you get. Proposals can be very hard to compare directly. They'll be formatted directly, the costs will be laid out differently, the different ones will include or exclude different elements, things like, in my example, in my industry, that would be things to do with support and maintenance and hosting and things. Some person A might say, oh, that's all included. Another one might say that's not included, and talk to us about how much that's going to cost. And then you're suddenly not comparing apples with apples. So, you may have to ask people follow-up questions and unpack that. And in terms of the sort of decision-making process, and this is probably more true of larger organizations and multiple stakeholders, but I think it's a sort of universal truth. Whenever I get a request for a proposal with an actual timeline in, and it's, proposals received by X date, shortlist prepared by date Y, pitches, decision, project starts on this date, I pretty much throw that page out and ignore it, because it almost never comes to pass that way. People do have a tendency to underestimate the amount of time it will take them to make a decision once they've had all of these, proposals and pitches and everything else back. This is my kumbaya slide, I think. So basically, in my script it says this is my good manners cost nothing slide. So I've been on the wrong end of plenty of what I would think of as being rude and lazy behaviour by potential clients. That can be people who just stop replying to things, people who don't let you know they've chosen another supplier, people who don't let you know that they've just decided that they don't want to do the project at all. It's everyone's right, of course, to do those things, but it's much better if you just let people know. In a way, the worst one is people who say, yes, let's do it, and then stop replying to your emails. We've had that as well, which is quite disconcerting. You know, I've heard horror stories of worse things. I think over the course of my 10 years, well, no, 12 years of trading independently, I've had to resort to the threat of legal action twice, which I think is pretty good going. I want to highlight the issue of asking suppliers to do things on a speculative basis. Because whether it's design, code, or consultancy, I just don't think it's fair to ask people to do things to show you their ideas, because their ideas are what they make their living from, which is why we, as a design agency, and we're not alone in this, have a very strict policy of never undertaking speculative creative design work, because you're essentially being asked to do what you do for money for free, and you're being asked to do it without all the things you would normally do first in order to produce good design work. So essentially it's costing you money to produce bad work that may or may not allow you to produce good work later. So I have a strict policy of no bidding anything where someone asks for pretty pictures before we've actually come to a commercial agreement. And we're not the only ones who have that view. And I'm sure there are people who have been asked to, you know, produce prototype software, or, you know, do a sample edit of a certain amount of a manuscript, or, you know, do some sketches for a book cover design or whatever. And, you know, it's not really fair on any of those people either. And then, of course, there's bad payers. So just don't be a bad payer. Right. So hopefully you would have been kind to your potential and chosen suppliers, and you'll achieve a happy and successful project outcome. The things that make a good potential client also make a good actual client. So if you start with good communication, a clear view of your objectives, asking questions when you're not sure, then the chances are you'll continue to do those things when you're working with a supplier, and that you'll have a fruitful long-term relationship with those suppliers, and that they'll then recommend you to other people as your needs evolve. You know, it's not uncommon for us to get asked for people, you know, to help, say, with social media or publicity or book cover design. And, you know, the nicer I know a client is, the more willingly I will send them off in the direction of my peers and friends to do more work with. After today, you're going to get some handouts, which have been provided by some of our sponsors. So one is from me, which is basically something you wouldn't normally see until you had got further down the commissioning process for an author website. So it's the questions that we go through with an author. And some of them will be obvious, like tell us about your books, and some of them will be more, hopefully, things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of. So that may be useful to anyone who is ever considering doing that. We've got a publicity briefing form from Ben from Cameron Publicity, and I had a look at this yesterday, and in the same vein, that had a lot of questions on it, some that I would have expected and some that I really wouldn't have thought about for a second. So that's a really good eye-opener. And we've got one from Andrew at Prepare to Publish about editorial and typesetting. I think editorial stuff, if you're not used to it, and I'm not particularly, because it's not really my area, is a bit of a minefield in terms of understanding the distinction between the different types of edit, at what point they're appropriate, you know, what to expect from those editorial processes. So I think that's a really useful thing as well. And as Justine said, it's beautifully typeset, as you would expect from a typesetter. So those will be sent out along with the recording of this afterwards. But we now have some time for questions.
Thanks, Simon. Should we go full screen again? Should we? Yeah, so people can see.
Oh, actually, before we go full screen, I just want to share my favourite graphic designer meme that I'd forgotten about this, but I saw this on social media recently. It's in the window of a Finnish graphic design firm. And it sort of illustrates the challenge of working with people on subjective stuff. Starting from we design everything €500 to you design everything €8,000, which, you know, I'm not gonna sort of, I don't want to pontificate about the challenges of, you know, working on design with clients, because, you know, that's our job, and we know the challenges that are involved. But it does, I think this quite nicely makes the point that as a former boss of mine used to say, why keep a dog and bark yourself? You know, there comes a point where it's just better to let the people who know what they're doing get on with the thing that they're doing.
So hang on, so we design everything, it's cheap, but if you start getting involved, then it's really expensive.
Exactly. To the point where it obviously becomes utterly ludicrous, and you might as well not be talking to them in the first place. And
so just trust people.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, trust is, I don't know whether you've said that in the.
I didn't actually, and that's sort of, that is ultimately the moral of this little meme is, you know, you have to trust the people that you choose to do what they know is the right thing to do based on what you've told them, and not second guessing all the time, and, you know, sort of metaphorically sort of standing over their shoulder going, oh, can you move that a bit to the left, and I'm not sure how I feel about that shade of pink. Anyway,
I mean, I think that's a good thing to say to anyone you're working with, not necessarily not outsourcing, but just being able to trust people.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. I think that's really interesting and useful. A lot of food for thought. We had someone that was asking about selling her books from China into England, which I think is more suitable to our agent table events than anything that people can help with today. Lots of people want to find agents, but does anybody have any specific questions for Simon on websites, or how he's worked with people, or does anybody want to ask any of our other partners here? We've got Ben who can give advice on PR and marketing, which I think lots of people need to know about, or Bill on data and how to serve things up.
And and typesetting and design.
Typesetting and design.
As I said, Bill's a mad scientist of the first order, so knows about things.
And then Andrew on editing and design. If no one has any questions, I might just ask each of them to just talk a little bit. Oh, Amanda's got a question, but maybe afterwards we'll come to them. Hi, Amanda.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. Tell everyone what you do as well. And
I'm an author.
What kind of books do you write?
It's certainly exciting because it's my first book. Non-fiction. I've written The Success Code and been published by HQ, HarperCollins. And it took me over 2 years to find an agent, and Justine helped me along the way and supported me. So it does happen. This is really interesting, and I just want to open it up a little, because when you have a publisher, they do lots of things, but they then leave you to it a lot of the time. So they do stuff around publication date, and then they leave you to it and nothing happens, and you're thinking, what now? Yeah. I chose to do a website because I thought it was important. I asked them, should I do a website? They were like, it's up to you, and which basically means we don't pay for that, so it's up to you. So I used to work in very big companies and had these big budgets, and it was great dealing with suppliers, because you'd go with your lovely big £100,000 budget and say, you know, and you'd give this great brief or whatever. And obviously, as an author, you don't know what budget. First of all, you have very little budget, and secondly, you know, what's my return? I don't think I do a website because I actually think it's a good thing for me to have. It anchors everything I do and puts it all in one place. But, you know, I had to keep a low realistic budget because I thought there's not really a return on investment here that I can measure. So it feels a little bit catch-22 with suppliers. You know, I would like to supplement, I would like to have a publicist, but what's my return on investment? So I don't really want to just throw money at it, not knowing what I'm going back. And the supplier doesn't want to talk to me without a budget. And it's almost like, well, if your budget's low. So it's very difficult for authors, I think, until you're hugely successful, you have masses of money and you just want to throw it everywhere. So it's
maybe
really,
Cameron should, come back to you on that one, unless Simon wanted to say, or you would.
No, I'd be interested to hear Ben's view on it from a publicity point of view.
Yeah. So, it's a good question. It's one I'm asked all the time. You know, if I invest X amounts into a publicity campaign, what am I going to get back for it? And publicity is really notoriously difficult to pin down in those terms. You know, we can get the coverage. You know, we can get, radio interviews, we can get, newspaper articles, that sort of thing. But how that turns into actual sales and when those sales come in can be tricky, because those sales could come in, 6 months down the line. We're working on a campaign for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. We're kind of, working on another campaign when you get the bulk of your sales, and eventually what your investment turns into in terms of sales. So it is a really difficult thing. So I tend to say, it's good that people are thinking about whether it's publicity or any other service in that way. You're looking at the bottom line, you're taking a very business-like approach. That's exactly right. But also keep in mind that there are a lot you can get from a publicity campaign that isn't just direct sales right away. So, you might get onto a TV program, or you might get a radio interview that leads to something else, that leads to something else, that leads to something else. So, it really is a matter of, a lot of it is, speculative in terms of what you might get back from it. The other thing I would say is that it's never nothing. So, you're never putting, money into a publicity campaign and not getting anything back from it. It's just a matter of whether, what you get back from it matches up with what your expectations are. New authors don't know what their expectations are often, or they don't, they don't necessarily know anything about the book publishing industry. They don't necessarily know what things cost or what they're going to get back from it. So I always like to have that conversation with any author before I start talking about what kind of campaign we would run for them and what sort of results they could get from it. It really depends on the book, and I always have that conversation up front.
Does that answer your question, Amanda?
Yeah, I think it's all just putting it into the pot, isn't it? It's the more you can find out. I mean, that's why these events are so useful, because the more you learn and you find out. And actually, what you just said there, Ben, is it's part of this whole networking thing. You're saying that if you do an interview somewhere, nothing may come of that, but you don't know what it may lead to. And what I've found in book publishing, it's all about the networking, and this leads on to this, leads on to this. And so, yeah, it's just all of this is just learning more and putting it all together. So you build a picture of where you're going with it all. So yeah.
I think, an independent author is not alone in not really being able to measure the ROI of their publicity spend, their marketing spend, their, digital spend, however much you spend on a website, and unless you're selling directly, which, not many authors or small publishers do, you can't really directly quantify the ROI for that. But, it all then becomes part of a network of things. So if you're doing a publicity campaign and you're active on social media and you've got a website, then you're more likely to generate interest, which drives people back to the site. If you're then signing people up to an email newsletter, then you're potentially giving yourself more opportunities to talk to them on a repeated basis, to give them freebies, to do other things like BookBub and these other sort of marketing mechanisms. And most of it is an act of faith. The only bit that isn't an act of faith is the kind of ultra measurable stuff like Google ads and Facebook ads and all the rest of it, which, because they can, show you your precise click-through rate, at least have the reassurance of giving you the sense that you will know what you've achieved. That doesn't necessarily mean that what you achieve will be a good return.
The book is also only part of your product, isn't it? So especially with something like Amanda, who could be a consultant around success, and like talking, yours is about education, how to educate your children for their success, right?
And no, that we
Oh,
remember, I got a publisher and then they changed the book.
oh, they changed the book. Okay.
That's what it was, and then
Right.
that's what happens when you get a publisher. They change
Changed
everything.
the book.
So it's about success generally, but yeah.
About success generally. Okay, but you have a database there that you can serve up in lots of different ways, and you could write a blog on it, and you can get lots of, there's people that write newsletters on success, or I'm trying to bring in Bill here as well, to think about how you would serve up content in lots. That's what you're doing with some of your clients. Is that right, Bill? Oh, Bill is in
You're muted, Bill.
You're Bill, and Bill's in Slovenia, so we can't hear him.
Okay, I can take sort of some of that. Yeah. I mean, for non-fiction authors, like Amanda, usually the book is one part of a portfolio career. So money spent on the book is not necessarily going to realize the value of that investment directly through book sales, but it may realize the value indirectly through being given asked to do a paid speaking gig, or a paid article opportunity, or being asked to appear on a video, which then leads to other things. In my experience, most of our non-fiction authors have those multiple strings to their bow. And so the book is part of that. And, we're used to with some of our clients who do explicitly say, this book is not, I'm not expecting this book to set the world on fire and generate loads of sales and make me loads of money. It exists so I can say I've written a book about the subject on which I wish to be known as an expert.
Yeah.
Slightly aside from spreading content in multiple formats, I've also done quite a lot in academic publishing in my time, and there exactly what Simon says can be the case. There are books produced, they tend to be £150 a copy, but the author at the time of writing will know that this will not sell more than 243 copies. And it may be almost as precise as that, because there are a certain number of people in that author's field, in academic departments, and there is a known list of libraries that will take things in that field. And that's it. And partly why, of course, academic publishing can make so much money, because they know their market before they even publish the book. But then the author is purely interested in reputation, and they expect to have no financial gain at all, but it is massively important to their career, indeed essential to their career, that they produce the opportunities to go and speak at conferences, to produce papers in other journals, and so on. And it's absolutely all about that.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to some authors today, also non-fiction authors, and trying to explain to them that best-selling copies, book sell, maybe to get in the charts, it's like 2,000 copies a week. It's not, and that's the best-selling one. Books don't sell in very, very high numbers, but and also it's not necessarily the first book that someone sells that does well, but it can be their fifth or sixth one.
No.
So building reputation. Andrew, I want to try and bring you into the conversation. I don't know how typesetting and editorial, but tell us how you work, what your favorite kind of clients are, and how you've had, have you ever had a relationship that's just kind of sung?
Plenty of those, luckily. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I think I was thinking about this just now in thinking about Amanda's question. I think I tend to get, in terms of self-publishing authors, my business is a mixture of business from publishers and from individual authors. I think there's two types of author, really. There are those who just want to get a book out and they have no idea, really. They've written something or they're writing something and they don't know what happens next, and they just need help, and therefore they're willing to pay for help because they're just lost in this world. And then there are those who treat it like a business. And of course, it's absolutely right to be asking questions like, what's the return on your investment? I think that's a great question to ask, and an exasperating one to answer in the world of publishing, because so many things are nebulous, as we've just heard. I mean, editorially speaking, I mean, I've touched on this in the handout, but, you know, part of your job as an editor or a typesetter is in a way for your service to be invisible. And therefore the author might start to think, well, why am I paying for this service? But of course, I suppose the premise is that it's possible in almost any case to make a book better than it was when it started. And in theory, that feeds into the sales and the reputation aspects and all those things. But it is very hard to quantify. And I think setting a budget, as Simon has talked about in his presentation, is a key part of that, because if you're going to treat it as a business, then you need to have some sense of what your fixed costs are, and which is fairly identifiable on the side of things that I'm used to doing, editing and typesetting things. It's fairly predictable what the costs will be. And so therefore, as an author, you want to roll that into your forward planning at the start. I can't possibly advise on the marketing side. I mean, I've got some authors who are, you know, come back to me repeatedly. I mean, there's one in particular who I think I've really enjoy working with, because he writes sort of cozy mysteries, I guess, in a particular arena set in the Caribbean, and they're very much, he's got a very defined audience, which he knows because of his kind of career path before he became an author. And he's built up this kind of collection of really nice characters. And now I've been working on all of his books, and they've become like friends, those characters, because I know them well. And he knows that I can fix the things that he's not quite good at on the technical side of writing. You know, I mean, but he's improving over time too. So there's a relationship that evolves as well, because he had massive problems with punctuating dialogue, for example, when we started, and now he's picked up from the fact that I keep hammering at him with the same things, and he's improving that. And, you know, but that doesn't mean there's suddenly nothing left for me to do. And of course, the more you fix the little things, the more you can...
Yeah, you learn a lot from your suppliers, don't you? I've learned a lot from Simon, from people that you work with.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I learn from authors too. And one of the things I love about editorial work is that you're suddenly immersed. I mean, I do a lot of non-fiction work, more than fiction really, but you get immersed in a little arena that you know, I come to things as a sort of general reader, but bring a lot of general knowledge as well, hopefully, so that you can sort of represent what your audience how they might respond to something. But also you learn about all kinds of subjects, and that's really rewarding.
Well, it's also, I was trying to explain to my husband, talking to him about like the book, and he said, you know, if it was just business, I would have told you to liquidate 3 years ago, because you don't, because my business, you don't. But actually, I hear about people that have got their books published or found agents, or they've got work, and it's such a rewarding world to be in. It's not just about money. I mean, it should be financially viable, but there's more to publishing. If we wanted to make lots of money, we wouldn't. No,
absolutely not. I always say that. I mean, I this morning I was with a client, an author who's written over 8 and had published, I should point out, over 80 books. You know, who's a historical romantic novelist, you know, who can churn out a new Regency romance in 3 weeks. And, you know, she's the first, although we've worked with lots of authors of all stripes, she is the first author in that sort of genre that I've ever worked with. And it's been an absolute delight learning about that sort of sector, you know, and having my eyes open to, you know, how publishing those kinds of books works, you know, and the kinds of deals that she's getting, you know, publishers commissioning 8 books at a time, and, you know, how she does the research and all this stuff. So yeah, it's not just about money. And I think as suppliers in this industry, you hopefully sort of continue to learn things and absorb things, and then at some point you find the opportunity to, you know, to recycle that back into your relationship with another client, and that makes everything better for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Ben, you had your hand up. I'm aware we've come up to 4 o'clock, so I'm going to give you the final comment now.
I was actually just waving to my son who just got home from
Oh
school.
no!
but
Okay.
but you know, I would say one other thing that Simon said that I wanted to pick up on is about working with people in the publishing industry. So there are publicity companies out there who do all sorts of publicity things, but you know, it's useful to have somebody who knows what an ISBN is. It's
Yeah.
useful to have somebody who knows how it all works. And even if I'm ultimately talking to the same people at the same newspaper that somebody who does a lot of movie publicity or company publicity does, I'm talking to them in a different way than those other people would be talking to them. So it is really useful to work with somebody who is in publishing and has publishing experience.
Yeah, and has the network, even if they can't help you, that you know someone who can, or they can ask someone that question. And it's a very collaborative business. I mean, Miles is on this call now. He's got loads of experience, and he was at Faber, and you know, but there's always more to learn. There's always more to find out. I think I might stop there. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. It's quite a sunny day, so it's nice to have. It's still nice to see people on Zoom. I particularly like to thank our sponsors, Bookswarm, Simon, you heard from Simon, and Cameron Publicity, Ben Cameron. Think Big Books we don't have with us today, but I'd like to thank them, and Arcasis, and so over there at Bill, and Prepare to Publish with Andrew. So thank you so much. The links to them will be in our follow-up. If anyone is thinking of getting some help in the industry, I really do recommend, as Simon and Ben have just said, getting specialists to help them, because it's a nuanced world. So but thank you very much. We can do a little round of applause now if we want to do a little end it. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy World Book Day. I hope you get to read some nice stuff. Please, I'll also send you the link to the short story thing we did last night. Just have a little listen to them, because they were really lovely worlds. Not very long, about 15-20 minutes of stories. Not nice to have some new people with us as well. So good luck, Amanda. Keep going. You'll keep going, and everyone keep going. It's a wonderful world, so let's always help each other in it. And thank you so much. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.